Fairy tales and legends come from all over the world. Today I'm going to read a story out of a treasury of Irish fairy and folk tales. This version was published by Stirling Publishing Co. Incorporated for Barnes & Noble in 2015. The story I'm going to read is called Fairies or No Fairies by Crofton Crocker. John Mulligan was a fine old fellow as ever threw a Carlow spur into the sides of a horse. He was, besides, as jolly a boon companion over a jug of punch as you would meet from Carnsore Point to Bloody Farland. And a good horse he used to ride, and a stiffer jug of punch than his was not in 19 baronies. Maybe he stuck more to it than he ought to have done, but that has nothing to do with the story I'm going to tell. John believed devoutly in fairies, and an angry man was he if you doubted them. He had more fairy stories than would make, if properly printed, in a rivulet of print running down a meadow of margin, 2 thick quartos for Mr. John Murray of Albemarle Street, all of which he used to tell on occasion that he could find listeners. Many believed his stories, many more did not believe them, but nobody in process of time used to contradict the old gentleman, for it was a pity to vex him. But he had a couple of young neighbors who had just come down from their first vacation in Trinity College to spend the summer months with an uncle of theirs, Mr. Whaley, and they were too full of logic to let the old man have his own way undisputed. Every story he told, they laughed at, and said it was impossible, that it was merely old woman's gabble, and other such things. When he would insist that all his stories were derived from the most credible sources, nay, that some of them had been told by his own grandmother, a very respectable old lady, but slightly affected in her faculties, as things that came under her own knowledge, they cut the matter short by declaring that she was in her dotage, and at the best of times had a strong propensity to pulling a long bow. "But," said they, "Jack Mulligan, did you ever see a fairy yourself?" "Never," was the reply. "Well then," they answered, "until you do not be bothering us with any more tales of your grandmother." Jack was particularly nettled at this, and took up the cudgels for his grandmother. But the yonkers were too sharp for him, and finally he got into a passion, as people generally do who have the worst of an argument. This evening it was at their uncle's, an old crony of his with whom he had dined, and he had taken a large portion of his usual beverage, and was quite riotous. He at last got up in a passion, ordered his horse, and in spite of his host's entreaties, galloped off, although he had intended to have slept there, declaring that he would not have anything more to do with a pair of puppies who, because they had learned how to read good-for-nothing books and cramped writing, and were taught by a parcel of wiggy, red-snouted, prating pigs, they imagined they knew more than a man who had held his buckle and tongue together facing the wind for the world for 5 dozen years. He rode off in a fret, and galloped as hard as his horse could powder away over the limestone. "The brats had me in one thing. I never did see a fairy, and I would give up 5 good acres as ever grew apple potatoes to get a glimpse of one. And by the powers, what is that?" He looked and saw a gallant spectacle. His road lay by a noble expanse gracefully sprinkled with trees, not thickly planted as in a dark forest, but disposed now in clumps of 5 or 6, now standing singly, towering over the plain around them as a beautiful promontory arising out of the sea. He had come right opposite to the glory of the wood. It was an oak, which in the oldest title deeds of the county, and they were at least 500 years old, was called the Old Oak. Age had hollowed its center, but their massy boughs still waved with their dark, serrated foliage. The moon was shining on it bright. If I were a poet like Mr. Wordsworth, I should tell you how the beautiful light was broken into 1,000 different fragments, and how it filled the entire tree with a glorious flood, bathing every particular leaf and showing forth every particular bough. But I am not a poet. I shall go on with my story. By this light Jack saw a brilliant company of lovely little forms dancing under the oak with an unsteady and rolling motion. The company was large. Some spread out far beyond the furthest boundary of the shadow of the oak's branches. Some were seen glancing through the flashes of light shining through its leaves. Some were barely visible, nestling under the trunk. Some, no doubt, were entirely concealed from his eyes. Never did man see anything more beautiful. They were not 3 inches in height, and beyond number, numberless. Jack threw his bridle over his horse's neck and drew up to the low wall which surrounded the area, and leaning over it, surveyed with infinite delight their diversified gambols. By looking long at them, he soon saw objects which had not struck him at first, in particular that in the middle was a chief of superior stature, round whom the group appeared to move. He gazed so long that he was quite overcome with joy, and could not help shouting out, "Bravo, little fellow," said he, "well kicked and strong." But the instant he uttered the words, the night was darkened, and the fairies vanished with the speed of lightning. "I wish," said Jack, "I had held my tongue, but no matter now. I shall just turn bridle about and go back to the castle, and beat the young Master Whaleys, fine reasoners as they think themselves, out of the field clean." No sooner said than done, and Jack was back again, as if upon the wings of the wind. He rapped fiercely at the door, and called aloud for the two collegians. "Hullo," said he, "young flatcaps, come down now if you dare. Come down if you dare. I shall give you ocular demonstration of the truth of what I was saying." Old Whaley put his head out the window and said, "Jack Mulligan, what brings you back so soon?" "The fairies!" shouted Jack. "The fairies!" "I am afraid," muttered the lord, "the last glass you took was too little watered, but no matter, come in and cool yourself over a tumbler of punch." He came in and sat down again at table. In great spirits he told his story, how he had seen thousands and tens of thousands of fairies dancing about the old oak. He described their beautiful dresses of shining silver, their flat-crowned hats glistening in the moonbeams, and the princely stature and demeanor of the central figure. He added that he heard them singing and playing the most enchanting music. But this was merely imagination. The young men laughed, but Jack held his ground. "Suppose," said one of the lads, "we join company with you on the road, and ride along to the place where you saw the fine company of fairies." "Done," cried Jack. "But I will not promise that you will find them there, for I saw them scuttling up in the sky like a flight of bees, and heard their wings whizzing through the air." This, you know, was of course a lie, for Jack had heard no such thing. Off rode the three, and came to the old oak wood. They arrived at the wall flanking the field where stood the great oak, and the moon, by this time having again emerged from the clouds, shone bright, as when Jack had passed. "Look there!" he cried exultingly, for the same spectacle again caught his eyes, and he pointed to it with his horsewhip. "Look, and deny if you can." "Why," said one of the lads, pausing, "true it is that we do see a company of creatures. But were they fairies 10 times over? I shall go among them," and he dismounted to climb over the wall. "Ah, Tom, Tom!" cried Jack. "Stop, man, stop! What are you doing?" "The fairies, the good people, I mean, they hate to be meddled with. You will be pinched or blinded, or your horse will cast its shoe, or, look, a wilful man will have his way. Oh, he is almost to the oak. God help him, for he is past the help of man." By this time Tom was under the tree and burst out laughing. "Jack," said he, "keep your prayers to yourself. Your fairies are not bad at all. Believe they will make tolerably good ketchup." "Ketchup!" said Jack. When he found that the two lads, for the second had followed his brother, were both laughing in the middle of the fairies, had dismounted and advanced slowly. "What do you mean by ketchup?" "Nothing," replied Tom, "but that they are mushrooms, as indeed they were, and your Oberon is merely this overgrown puffball." Poor Mulligan gave a long whistle of amazement, staggered back to his horse without saying a word, and rode home in a hard gallop. Never looking behind him, many a long day it was before he ventured to face the laughers, and to the day of his death the people of the parish, aye, and 5 parishes round, called him nothing but Mushroom Jack. I should be sorry if all my fairy stories ended with so little dignity, but these our actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits and are melted into air, into thin air. So what do you think? Did Jack see fairies, or were they mushrooms all along? It's up to you to decide.